Hi, I'm Destiny from Nifty Knittings, and today I'm going to show you how to knit the Little Hearts Infinity Scarf. You will need US 17 12mm straight or circular needles and a size P crochet hook for a provisional cast on. I will be using Lion Brand Woolies Thick and Quick in mustard for my main color and Fisherman for my contrasting color. You will also need a small amount of scrap yarn for a provisional cast on. There are multiple ways to do a provisional cast on, but my favorite and the one I found the easiest is to use a crochet hook. I'm going to start by making a slip knot and placing it on my crochet hook. Then I like to hold the tail of the scrap yarn in my left hand with the knitting needle, and with my right hand I wrap the yarn around the back of both the crochet hook and the knitting needle and then pull it through the loop on my crochet hook. So now I have one stitch cast on to my needle. And for this pattern we will be casting on 19 stitches. So I'm going to continue wrapping my yarn around the back of the needle and pulling it through the loop. And I'll just keep repeating this until I have 19 stitches casted on. We're using a provisional cast on because when we're finished we are going to remove the scrap yarn and expose the live stitches and then graft them together with our stitches that are still on the needle for a seamless join. I have my 19 stitches casted on, and I'm just going to chain a few extra stitches just to mark my place so I know where to start removing my cast on, my provisional cast on when the time comes. Okay, now we are ready to start row 1, which is a wrong side row, and I'm using my main color, which is the mustard color, and I'm simply going to purl across this entire row. So I'm just holding the tail in my left hand and then purling that first stitch. Okay, I'm going to turn my work, and row 2 is a right side row, and in this row we will be joining our contrasting color and working from the chart. So again, the free pattern is available at niftyknittings.com, and if we follow our chart we will be knitting 3 stitches with our main color, 1 with the contrasting color, and 3 with the main color. And we'll continue repeating everything within the black box. So 1 with the contrasting color and 3 with main color until we get to the end of the row. So with my main color, I'm going to slip my first stitch knitwise. Every right side row we will slip the first stitch knitwise and knit 2. And then I'm going to knit 1 with the contrasting color. I'm just going to hold that tail in my left hand and knit that first stitch. And then knit 3 with the main color. Knit 1 with my contrasting color. I like to hold my contrasting color in my left hand and knit that continentally. You can knit however you are more comfortable. knit 3 with the main color, knit 1 contrasting color, and then knit 3 with the main color. Okay. Round 3 is another wrong side row. So again, we'll be purling across, only this time we need to make sure we carry our contrasting color back along with us. So I'll show you how we do that. We're going to start by slipping the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. We'll do this for every wrong side row. And then begin purling. Now every 4 or 5 stitches we are going to want to tack down that contrasting color so that it carries along the back side. And basically we're just going to be twisting the yarns together to catch that contrasting color. So if you just twist this over the main color, that'll lock it into place when you purl your next main color stitch. And we'll continue twisting these yarns together every 4 or 5 stitches. I'm just going to bring my contrasting yarn up, and that will lock it into place when I purl my next main color. And bring it back down. That'll lock it into place when I purl my next main color again. You don't want to pull that contrasting yarn too tightly. You want it nice and even with the rest of the tension of your piece. Twist them one more time and purl. Okay, so we finished round 3. So again, make sure your tension's nice and even. If you pull that contrasting yarn too tight, your work will start to curl in on itself. So stretch it out a little bit so it's nice and loose. And for row 4, we're going to knit 1 with main color, knit 1 with contrasting color, knit 3 with main color. Again, we're going to slip the first stitch knitwise, and knit 1 with our contrasting color, knit 3 with main color, knit 1 with contrasting color, and keep following the chart to the end of the row. Okay, now we can kind of see our pattern starting to develop. That's the right side. And then for the wrong side, we start repeating our chart. So we're back to row 1. Again, we'll just purl across, but make sure to tack that contrasting color down as you go. So slip the first stitch purlwise. And then every 4 or 5 stitches, we'll want to tack down that contrasting color. So just twisting the yarns and continue purling. So we will continue repeating rows 1 through 4 until your scarf measures 60 inches long, making sure to end after a row 4 repeat. Okay, I finished working my scarf. It's now about 60 inches long. And now we will be grafting the ends together. So I finished after a row 4 repeat, and I'm leaving my stitches on my needle, but now we'll have to remove our scrap yarn and place those live stitches on the other end of the needle, or on the second needle if you're using straight needles. So we'll begin removing the scrap yarn right where we had chained those few extra stitches. And we will begin placing those stitches on our needle. Right where our tail is wrapped over the yarn here, we're going to go ahead and count the tail as a stitch. So just place that tail over your needle. And then we're simply going to follow the blue scrap yarn with our needle, placing it into the main color stitches, and then gently tugging the blue scrap yarn out. So I'm going in through the front of the stitch and pulling the blue yarn. You want to make sure to go through the front and not the back so your stitches don't get twisted. Your front leg should be leaning forward of the stitch. If it's leaning the opposite way, then that's how you'll know it's twisted, so just turn it back the other way. And just make sure you have 19 stitches when you are finished removing the scrap yarn. When you have all your stitches back on your needle, you can go ahead and pull that scrap yarn through. And we'll be grafting the two ends together with Kitchener stitch. Just make sure that tail end is still hanging over your needle. And we'll just be grafting these two ends together. So I'm going to take a length of main color yarn about 3 times the length that we will be grafting and thread that onto my yarn needle. To set this up, I will insert my yarn needle through the front needle, the first stitch of the front needle, purlwise, and leave that stitch on the needle. And then I will go into the back needle, the first stitch, knitwise, and leave that stitch on the needle. Now to do the Kitchener stitch, we start with the front needle. We bring our yarn needle through that first stitch knitwise and slide that stitch off the needle. Then we'll go into the second stitch purlwise, but leave that stitch on the needle. So just think knit off, purl on. For the back needle, we'll do the opposite. We go into that first stitch purlwise and slip it off the needle, and then into the second stitch knitwise, but leave it on the needle. So think purl off, knit on. And we just keep repeating these 2 steps. So going back to the front needle, again we're going to slip that first stitch off knitwise, and then go into the second stitch purlwise, knit off, purl on. And then for the back needle, slip the first stitch off purlwise, and then go into the second stitch knitwise, purl off, knit on. So just keep repeating knit off, purl off, knit on, until you have 1 stitch left on each needle. Make sure not to work the Kitchener stitch too tightly. I like to do mine nice and loose and then come back in with a yarn needle and tighten up the stitches to match the rest of my gauge. I have 2 stitches left on each needle, including my tail yarn on my back needle. And again, I'm just going to slip the first stitch off the front needle knitwise and go into the second stitch purlwise. And then for the back needle, slip off purlwise and just bring my yarn needle underneath that tail yarn knitwise. Then when there's 1 stitch left on each needle, I will knit off and purl off. And that's it. If your graph looks a little bit wonky at this point, that's perfectly normal. I like to take my yarn needle back through and just kind of tighten up these stitches to match the rest of my gauge. So just find that first stitch from the start of the graft and just snug it up just a little bit, not too tight. We just want it to be nice and even with the rest of our scarf. And just follow that strand of yarn all the way back to the other end, tightening up those stitches as you go. Once I'm all done with this, I'll weave in all my ends, and I like to give it a good wet blocking. So I submerge it in a bowl with some warm water and a little bit of wool wash, and then I will press out the excess water, and then lay it on a towel, and then roll the towel up, and then step on the towel to squeeze out all the extra water, and then I'll lay it flat to dry. That really helps to open up the stitches and even everything out, and it also helps it uncurl a bit. It will curl a little bit because that's the nature of stockinette, but blocking will really help open it up. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. For more free patterns and tutorials, please visit niftyknittings.com.